Alright folks, we're going to get started. So to let you know what's going on, I have been meaning for a long time to learn how AlphaZero works. It's an algorithm that the Deepmind folks put together for playing games in a way that doesn't require the implementer of the algorithm to have a really good idea of what good strategy is in that game, or even have any kind of especially good expertise at judging who's winning a game or anything like that, so you don't need a lot of domain knowledge. I haven't yet understood the whole algorithm, but I've understood a small part of it. I spent about a week learning and implementing part of it, and it was pretty cool, and so I thought it would be really fun to share that with folks and explain what I learned. So that's what we're going to do for the next little bit here. So let's get started. Let me just give you a quick overview of how I'd like to structure this explanation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an introduction to an algorithm called Minimax. And Minimax is also a game playing algorithm that is especially easy to explain and will help me set up the problem that we're trying to solve by having an algorithm at all. And then I will identify a couple of different problems with the Minimax algorithm and talk to you about each of them in turn, about how to fix them and get a little bit closer to what is called Monte Carlo tree search, which is the kind of tree search that AlphaZero uses. So let's get started. So before I can tell you what Minimax is, there's a little audience participation thing. I think we're going to skip over that for this run through. So before I can tell you what Minimax is and does, I have to explain what problem it is trying to solve. So the problem we're trying to solve is to figure out how to play games. For the purposes of this talk, here's what a game is going to be. There's going to be some number of players in this game. In the diagram I have on the screen right now, there are 3 players: box, circle, and cloud. And at any given moment in the game, it is one of the players' turns to make a decision. And once they've made a decision, they advance the state of the game to a new state, and then it's maybe a different player's turn, or maybe not. So in the picture here, what we have is a tree. The nodes of the tree are states of the game. There's sort of a complete description of all of the information that describes the game, where any pieces are on the board, any history that needs to be remembered to decide what moves are legal and illegal, how much money each of the Monopoly players has, whatever state there is, that's stored in one of these nodes. And the edges are choices that the player can make on their turn. So they're moves in the game. Okay, so the tree might be very deep. So after making lots and lots of choices, eventually we get to a part of the tree where the game has finished. And in finished states, there is a label which says how happy each of the players are that they arrived in that particular finished state. So that's the numbers at the bottom of the screen here. There's a score for box, circle, and cloud for each final leaf in this tree. I've picked some random numbers between -9 and 9 from random.org just to illustrate what I mean by a game and so forth, and to give a running example to play with. And by the way, please feel free to chime in with questions anytime if there's something that's unclear or I went too fast or you just feel like joining in. Okay, cool. So that's what a game is for the purposes of this talk. And the problem that Minimax solves is at any given node of the tree, we'd like to decide which move that player should pick that'll give the best outcome. And so, you know, Box has 4 choices at the beginning. Which one of those 4 should he choose to play the game well? So that's the problem we're trying to solve. And Minimax is an algorithm that solves that problem. It is sort of the platonic ideal of tree searches. It's the search. It's the mathematician's first love. Minimax is the thing that makes other little baby searches wear their underpants over their pants because they think it makes them look like Minimax. It is simple, it's elegant, it is obviously correct, and it is utterly useless. But let's hear about how it works. So here's the plan for Minimax. You start at the leaves of the tree, that is the finished states of the game, and we're going to work towards the root. That is the first move of the game. Each player is going to pick the move that's best for them. And that's pretty much it. The outcome of the algorithm is a modified game tree with new labels at each of the nodes. And the labels at the nodes are a description of the best worst-case outcome that each player can guarantee for themselves, no matter how the other players play, under the assumption that the other players are also playing to win. Okay? So let's do an example to see how this works. This is the same game tree we had before. We're going to start in the bottom left, and we're going to assume, I've put these dotted arrows to sort of signify that a real game tree might have lots more content down here, right? There may be way more than just 2 moves in a game. But for the purposes of this illustration, let's just say that this third row of states are leaves. Okay? So in the bottom left, it is blue's turn to make a decision. And, blue circle. And the choice that he has is to choose between getting 1 point, 5 points, or -6 points. So obviously circle is going to pick the move that gives him the most points in this situation, which is the 5 points. So circle is going to choose this move, and once we've chosen a move, we're going to back propagate this information about the scores that each of the players get to the node as well. So we're going to label the node with -4, 5, -6, because that's the scores at the leaf that circle chose. And we're going to annotate the edges to mark the one that leads to that outcome. Okay? In the second one, we have the same situation. So circle is choosing between 0 points and -1 points. 0 points is better, so he chooses that move. And then we have sort of an interesting situation here. And actually, my original intention was to completely gloss over this subtlety. But I asked, as I said, I asked random.org for some scores. And it turned out that the scores it picked happened to highlight this subtlety. And they did it at exactly the point in the exposition where if I had chosen to do it, I would have wanted to do it here and not somewhere else. And so I took that as a sign, so we're going to talk about it. So what is the subtlety? Here, Cloud has 2 different moves that both have the same maximum score of 8, right? So that's better than the -4 and the -8. And so the score that we're going to label for Cloud on this node is definitely 8. but it's not super clear exactly what we should pick for the scores for circle and box for this label. So the Minimax choice is each of the players makes a sort of worst case assumption. Since we're trying to get a label that describes the best worst case utility that each player can guarantee for themselves. So for circle, between 4 and 5, 4 is the more pessimistic choice. So we'll pick 4 for circle. And for box, between 2 and -8 is the more pessimistic choice. So the labels will be -8 and 4. And then as far as choosing a move, we can just sort of do it arbitrarily. Whatever tiebreaker you use doesn't really matter. Okay? And of course we do the same thing for the last node. So box prefers the move that gives him 5 points over the ones that give him negative points. So we do that labeling. We label the move that got there. And then we are dealing with the top node, the root node. And it is box's turn, so he's going to choose between the scores that are available to him are -4, 8, -8, and 5. 8 is the biggest one, so we're going to pick that move. And that will be the end of the Minimax algorithm. So at this point, we have labeled the entire tree with utilities for each of the players, and labeled each of the move sets with a preferred move. So if these players were to play according to the Minimax strategy, box would choose this move, circle would choose this move, and then the game would end. Okay? Okay. So, cool. That's Minimax. And it turns out it kind of sucks. And so before I tell you how to fix the problem with it sucking, I'm going to have to tell you why it sucks. And here's why it sucks. So I invite you to do the following exercise. Code up Minimax in your favorite programming language. Teach it the rules of chess, so you make some state description for a chessboard and show it which moves are legal, and then set it off running. And if you do this, you will sit there and stare at your computer, and you'll like drum your fingers for a little while, and then you'll start wondering like, just how long is this thing going to run? And so you'll start doing some back of the envelope calculations, and you'll be like, well, there's like 10 to the 50 possible positions. Probably you can't reach all of them, but you could probably reach most of them. Maybe you'll look online about some analysis of how many positions you can reach. In any case, it's way, way, way too many. You're going to be sitting there forever, and you have to touch all of the leaves, because to make a decision at one level above the leaf, you have to look at all the leaves to see which one is the best. So, that's never going to work. In practice, the way that people normally deal with this problem is they don't descend all the way into the tree to the leaves. They only descend a little bit in, and however deep you search, you guess at what Minimax's valuation would be if you continued running that search all the way to the end. Okay, so that step is completely computationally intractable, and so we're going to have to approximate it somehow. And then once we've done that approximation, then we Minimax our way back to the root. Okay, so this is the way that people normally solve this problem. And that's how we're going to solve it as well. And the question is, how do we construct this guess about what Minimax's valuation would be if we ran it? So, here is weird trick number 1. The plan is, instead of looking at all of the leaves, we are going to sample from some distribution on the leaves that are reachable from the current node. And we're going to use the expected utility under that sample as a guess for the valuation that Minimax would give. So you have to say, to be clear, you have to say what distribution you're going to use. A typical first implementation of Monte Carlo tree search will choose the distribution that's easy to compute, which is if the game is not finished, choose uniformly from among all of the legal next moves, and then keep doing that until you get to the end of the game. And that will give you, that's sort of an implicit description of a distribution on all of the leaves. Okay. So now that gives us a way to get an answer before the heat death of the universe. And now I'm going to do what is going to seem like a digression, but I promise it's related, and I'll tell you how it's related after we've digressed a little bit. So I'm going to tell you how to lose slowly in Vegas. So here's what I mean. So you walk into a casino in Las Vegas, and you see an enormous array of slot machines. And you have in your pocket $20 that you're willing to lose, and the slot machines cost $1 each or something, and you have to decide which slot machines you're going to play. Which ones are you going to play? It might be that some of them are slightly less bad than other ones, and ideally you'd like to figure out which ones are slightly less bad and play those the most with your $20. Okay. So there's a couple of obvious strategies that don't do very well. So here's how to lose quickly. One thing you could do is you could walk in, pick a slot machine, and just say once and for all, that's the one I'm going to play, and I'm going to play all $20, and I'm just going to play until I'm out of money. And the problem with this is, it's possible that you picked the worst one. Probably you didn't. Probably you picked a merely mediocre one. But you'll never learn any information about any of the slot machines except the one you picked. So a different idea, which would be like better risk management, would be like I could just start walking down the row of slot machines and play them one at a time. And when I get to the end, start back from the beginning and then just keep doing that. That's sort of good risk management, right? Because if there's n machines, only 1 over n of my fraction of my dollars are spent on the worst machine. And you get pretty decent judgments of how good each machine is, right? Pretty equal judgments. But then at the end of the day, the flip side to it being good risk management is that it's really poor reward management, because you never take advantage of the knowledge that you gained about which machines are good to do a better job of picking. So you never go, hey, I've played this machine and it does better, like twice as well. It does twice as well as the other ones in the plays that I've seen. Maybe I should keep playing that one. You never do that. So it would be nice to come up with an algorithm that does a good job of using the information that we've seen so far to decide which one is probably best and play that more, without falling into the problem of like never exploring the ones we're not so sure about. So this is a formal problem statement of the algorithm that we'd like to design to solve this problem. So we have we're going to model these slot machines as a collection of unknown distributions, and we'll make an assumption that we know like what the maximum payout of the machine is. So we'll say that the distributions have support 0 to 1. That is, when you sample from one of these distributions, you get a number between 0 and 1. 1 will be our stand-in for the maximum payout. But we're not going to assume that we know anything else special about these distributions. So they could be like normally distributed, or they could be exponentially distributed, or whatever. We don't know before we start playing them how the creator of the slot machine decided what the payouts should be. Okay? And the game we're going to play is we're going to repeatedly pick one of the distributions and sample from it. That'll give us a collection of samples, and then we're going to compute how well we did versus what the optimal choice would be. So we don't know the optimal choice. But sort of theoretically, we can talk about it. So one of the distributions unknown to us has the highest average payout. And the regret of an algorithm for choosing which distributions to sample from is the expected difference between the actual payout they see and what the sort of max payout would be if they did the optimal thing. So that's the number of times you play times the best average minus the sum of the actual samples you saw. Okay? So the expectation of this thing is called regret, and we'd like to find an algorithm that minimizes regret as much as possible. Okay? So now I will tell you about the algorithm called UCB1. It is an algorithm for doing one of these, what's called a multi-armed bandit problem. So called because slot machines are affectionately known as one-armed bandits because they steal your money and they have just the one arm lever that you pull to play. So a multi-armed bandit is you have lots of slot machines. They're all taking your money. Okay, so here's the algorithm. It's very simple. We're just going to keep track of two statistics about the samples that we've seen so far. The first is the payout from each distribution. So that's the sum of the samples from each of the slot machines. And the second is the count of how many times we've played each of the slot machines. Okay? And we'll also compute from that. We can compute from that the total number of times we've played just by adding up the counts for each of the machines. And when we've done m-1 samples from different distributions, the way that we choose which slot machine to sample from next is we pick the distribution that maximizes this statistic, pi over ci plus square root of 2 log c over ci. Now, if you are like me, when you look at this the first time, you go, what the heck is this nonsense? Why is this right? Okay, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through it very slowly and just pronounce sort of what each of these terms says and why it's a sane behavior. And then I'll explain a little bit about how this expression was discovered and why it's a good choice of expression. Okay? So let's just walk through it slowly. So pi over ci is the total payout, the total number of dollars we've gotten from that slot machine divided by the number of times we played it. So that's the average dollars we get by playing that machine. Okay? And so that means if we're maximizing this whole thing, then machines that pay out more on average will have a bigger term here, and they'll tend to get selected more often. Okay? Now this term, on top is the log of the total number of times we've played in the past. And on the bottom is the number of times we've played just the machine we're considering. So this thing, as we play a single machine, as we play more and more, the term on the top keeps growing. And if we decide not to play machine I a lot of times in a row, then the numerator will grow and the denominator will not grow. So the longer we decide not to play it, the more likely we are to pick it because we keep getting this we keep getting this boost to its score. On the other hand, if we play it a lot, then the denominator is going to grow much faster than the numerator grows as we play it a lot, because the top one scales with just the log and the bottom one scales linearly. So as we play a single machine over and over and over, that incentivizes all of the other machines to get picked. Okay? So these two terms together have a bonus for machines that seem to have done well in the past, and a bonus for machines that we haven't picked very often. So it has a balance between this sort of exploration mode where we're trying new things just to make sure we have the right answer, and exploitation mode where we say, no, I'm pretty sure I know which one is best, and we should play that one to get the reward from playing the best one. All right. Now, even after that explanation, you still might be a little bit upset because there's a lot of different functions that you could use that have this sort of that have these sort of mechanics where playing a single machine incentivizes the other ones. Like, you know, is it really obvious that plus is the right operation to combine these two things? No. Why is there a square root? Like, why is that the right monomial? Why shouldn't it be squared or cubed root or to the power of 1.675 or whatever? Is division really the right thing? Is natural log really the right thing? So I am not going to walk through the entire derivation of all of these symbols, but I will tell you a couple nice properties that this choice of expression has. There is a nice sort of statistical intuition for what this expression means. So you can compute a confidence interval around the mean. So recall that this pi over ci term is the average payout from the samples that we've seen so far. And this part is a confidence interval around that mean that says how certain we are that the true mean is within that range. And there's a sort of simulated annealing kind of thing going on, where over time, as we take more and more samples, we demand that the confidence be higher and higher. So this is there's a nice statistical interpretation of the confidence interval, and you compute that using what's called the Chebyshev bound. You can look that up on Wikipedia later if you like. I'm not going to talk about it in detail. And this has some nice properties. So one of the nice properties is even not knowing anything about the distribution, except its minimum and maximum possible samples, this expression will choose the best distribution exponentially more often than any other in the long run. And after m selections, there's only logarithmic regret, and it turns out that this is asymptotically optimal among all possible algorithms for choosing a machine. Now, if you make more assumptions about the distributions, then you can do better. But we're not going to make any assumptions about how these distributions are chosen. Okay? Cool. Okay, so this is weird trick number 2, and so now I'm going to tell you how to tie multi-armed bandit problems into our tree search. So the situation we're in is we have spent some time expanding some part of the, like searching through some part of the tree. We've gotten to, I don't know, depth 3 or something, and we've made some random plays from each of the nodes at depth 3 to make a guess about what the value of that node is, and we've propagated that information back to the root. And it turns out that after doing all of that, I have more computation time left over before I'm required to make a decision about what move to play. So I should do some more random rollouts to get better information about the valuation of the nodes. And the question is, which node should I do a rollout from? Okay, so this looks a lot like a multi-armed bandit problem because I have a whole bunch of sort of unknown distributions over leaves, over values of the leaves, and I want to know, I want to make this balance between getting better information about the ones that I think are probably best, and making sure that I don't completely ignore the ones I don't know much about. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take UCB1 and we're going to turn it into UCT1. UCB was, by the way, upper confidence bound. UCT is upper confidence bound for trees. Why they leave out the B, I don't know, but there it is. And so what we're going to do is to choose which node to do a rollout from, we're going to start at the root of the tree. We have, 4 children in our example. We're going to use the UCB1 decision metric to decide which of those children to descend to. And then we're going to iterate that. So when we get to, maybe we chose child 2, and then we're going to use UCB1 to decide which of those children to go to. And we're going to keep doing that until we find a node that we haven't done any rollouts from yet. And as soon as we do that, we'll do a rollout from there, get some information about the value of that node, and propagate that information back up to the root. Okay, so at this point, I have explained to you everything you need to know, believe it or not, about how to implement Monte Carlo tree search. And I'd just like to take 1 second to do a quick recap of sort of what we've accomplished so far, which is actually sort of sounds like a relatively sensible algorithm. So the way it works is we use some random playout of a game to make a guess about how good each of some follow-up situations are, and we use the information about which are the best to guide which move we're going to pick. So we sort of, and if you think about how humans play games, this is relative related, I think, to how people do it. They look at what is the outcome if I play this move. Is that sort of a sensible, good position? Make a guess about how good that position is, and then try to pick the move that leads us to the best situation. Now, before I talk about the next section, I would like to have a sort of a visceral feel about how this works. So to do that, I am going to show you, I have implemented Monte Carlo tree search, and I'm going to show you a game tree that's the result of spending some time doing Monte Carlo tree search. So when I started the talk, I also kicked off a Monte Carlo tree search on a Dr. Mario game. So before I show you that, I'm going to show you, give you a quick explanation of the Dr. Mario game rules. I think probably some of you already know this well, but there will be some of you maybe that don't know exactly how that game works, and I'd like to demonstrate that before we kick off the demo. So I'm going to transition over. This is me playing Dr. Mario and doing a fantastic job, if I say so myself. So here's the situation. You have this, it's sort of like Tetris, so there are pieces that fall from the top of the screen, and you are in control of moving the pieces left and right, and you can rotate them. And the goal of the game is to eliminate all of these viruses that start out on the board. And the way that things get eliminated is when you line up 4 or more items of the same color, horizontally or vertically, they disappear from the screen. So, and then if there is stuff that's sort of not supported from underneath, then it falls down the screen. Okay, so that's how the game is played. And I'm going to stop showing you the gameplay now and switch to the demo. I intended to ask you all to take a second to make a guess about about how many rollouts you thought had happened in the half hour since we started. I forgot to do that, and so now you get to know the answer before before I ask, but there you go. So I'm going to explain a little bit what's showing here, and I'm going to stop the thinking for the moment. So since we started, there's been about 2 million rollouts. So we've explored 2 million nodes in the tree of the game tree of Dr. Mario. And what you are seeing here is from left to right are placements of the first pill that the game is thinking about, or the AI is thinking about making. And so we can scroll through these. There's a couple that are off the screen to the right because the screen just isn't big enough. And looks like there's about 80 different places that we could put a pill. And for each of the positions, these are the two statistics that we said we were going to keep for each distribution. If you remember, we're going to count how many times we played it. And what it's showing here is the average value, but what it's actually stored in the back end, not for display, but for storage, is the total value from all of those rollouts. And then for display, it's just dividing by the number of rollouts to show you the average value. So this is on the left is the move it thinks is the best, and then as we scroll to the right, it thinks these moves are less and less good. So by the time we get all the way over here to the rank 80 things, it's dropped the pill exactly mismatched from where it ought to be, sort of. So this yellow half doesn't line up with any other yellow objects, and this blue half doesn't line up with any other blue objects. Sort of a useless move. Meanwhile, the moves it thinks are good, you can see are sort of starting to set up these lines of multiple objects of the same color. Okay, and now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to descend down the tree. So down the tree is we've made some moves and are thinking about what comes next. And I'd like you, before I do that, to in your head, you know there's 2 million rollouts. Take a guess how many moves ahead the AI is thinking. Like how deep are its plans? How far ahead has it thought? Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit down, and so it's going to keep going to whichever move has the most rollouts, and we'll just count how many moves ahead it's thinking. Okay, so here's the first move. The second move is a random choice between these guys, so it thinks about all of these equally, and then. So that's 1, 2, this is the third step, fourth step, fifth step, sixth step. By the time we get to the sixth step, we are down to one or none rollouts per move. So that is 3 placements of pills and 3 sort of random choices of the adversary, let's say, okay? So it's really only thinking 3 moves ahead, which is not very deep. And that's a full 30 minutes of thinking. Normally when you play a game of Dr. Mario, as you saw, you're playing multiple moves per second. So it's really not thinking very far ahead. Okay, so the next piece that sucks about our algorithm at the moment is the problem that I was describing before, which is that it doesn't think very deeply or very well. So let me say a bit more about what I mean there. I was describing the way that humans play games, and there's one thing about the algorithm that is very unlike the way humans do it. So I'm going to give you some examples from Go, because that's my, AlphaZero started with Go, and I love Go, and I think it's a fantastic game. So I'm going to give some examples from that. I'll give an example from chess as well later in case this one doesn't resonate with you. Stick with me. But one of the things that happens is there are game states where a human player will look at it and it'll be really obvious to them how good that state is for one player or the other. So here's an example of a Go board. And if you give this to an expert Go player, they're going to spend, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds looking at it and deciphering what the heck was happening. Probably less if they were following the game up to here. And at the end of that deliberation, they're going to go, all right, black is in good shape here. And the reason they're going to say black is in really good shape is because he has a really enormous territory in the bottom left. Go is a game about surrounding territory with your stones. And white really hasn't really surrounded that much, even if white gets to play all of the moves that he wants to play from here on out through the rest of the game. So white doesn't have any territorial answers to this enormous black territory in the bottom left. And so one thing that humans do is, the way that the human did this is not by going like, okay, let's sort of, in my mind, play this game out all the way to the end and see how it looks at the end. Okay? Instead, they have sort of somehow a pretty good guess about what's going to happen without even having done that exercise of figuring out how to go all the way to the end. And in addition to positions that are obvious, there's another thing that's sort of obvious to human players. In a lot of situations, there are sort of obvious choices about what move to play. So if you show this situation to an expert Go player, moves in the game of Go are placing down a stone on open intersections of the board. And so if you show this and ask them where is black going to play or where is white going to play, they're going to take only like 0 milliseconds, and then they're going to tell you, okay, if I'm white, I am definitely playing here. That captures some stones and rescues a stone of mine that's in danger. Almost certainly going to play here. They might also, if you give them time to think, they might also hesitate and consider maybe a move over here to cut off a stone from its friends, or a move up here near where there is a territorial wall that has not been finished by one of the players. Okay? But there's 26 open intersections in the pictured part of the board alone, and even if you give them a long time to think, they're only going to be thinking about 3 or 4 of these moves really seriously. So that cuts down the branching factor enormously. And so here's I'd like to give one more example from the domain of chess, which I hope will resonate with some people. So if you ask, what should white do in this position? An expert chess player will see there's sort of a bad situation with this black pawn, right? Because this black pawn is threatening to capture either the knight or the rook. It's called a fork. And whichever one you save by moving it out of capturing position, the pawn will be able to take the other. And pawns are basically worthless pieces, so it doesn't worry them that might put the pawn in a bad position, a vulnerable position. On the other hand, if you're white, an expert player is going to be thinking about exactly one move, and it is the move that puts the rook here. And the reason that's a good move is because it prevents this pawn from moving. If this pawn, now with the rook here, if this pawn moves, the king will be in check. So that makes moving the pawn illegal. So there's 24 legal positions on this, or legal moves on this board, and a human expert is going to be thinking about pretty much exactly one, no matter how much time you give them to think. So again, it's cutting down the branching factor by an enormous amount. And Monte Carlo tree search doesn't have a really good answer for either of these things. So in Monte Carlo tree search land, when we first visit a position in a game, we start with a really low quality evaluation, right? We just play a random selection of moves all the way to the end of the game, and just assume that whatever outcome we saw there is the actual outcome of that position. And because the rollouts select moves uniformly at random in this way, any single rollout only gives us very low quality information for improving our evaluation, which means that convergence of our guess about how good a node is to the correct answer is very, very slow. So, in the AlphaZero algorithm, one of the things they said was, what if we spent a little bit more time and did slightly better on both of these questions? It seems like if we could do something good, there could be some really big payoff. Excuse me. So, weird trick number 3 is deep learning. You use a deep convolutional neural net. And what you feed into this net is a description of the current game position. And the outputs that you're looking for are 2 things. The first thing is if we can learn how Monte Carlo tree search would evaluate the position if it had a lot of time to think, and use that as an initial estimate before we've gotten a lot of information from rollouts, then that will improve our decisions about which nodes to do more rollouts from. And the second piece of information we're looking for is, instead of choosing moves uniformly at random during our rollouts, we'd like the neural net to have some sort of description of what a typical or standard or good move would be, and bias our rollouts towards moves that the players would actually make. So this is going to be a guess about, if Monte Carlo tree search had a lot of time to think about it, what move would it pick? And use that information to bias rollouts and get better quality information from each rollout. So this improves the initial estimate, and it improves the rate at which the initial estimate improves per rollout. Then there's the question of like, okay, cool, I'd love to have a neural net that sort of just gives me the answer I need in the first place. How do I train that neural net? Like, what do I feed it? And the answer there is you spend a lot of time playing random games using Monte Carlo tree search, spending a lot of time thinking about every move, and use the output of the Monte Carlo tree search as the input to the training for your deep convolutional neural net. And then, of course, you can iterate the process. So if you have improved your tree search with better valuation estimates and better rollouts, then you're going to have a better AI. You can use that to play games with long thinking time and get better training data. And you do this iterative process where you get a better and better neural net and a better and better tree search out of it. Cool. So I am not going to go into a ton of detail on how the deep convolutional neural nets are set up and like exactly what that means and how they're trained and all of that, because I don't know it yet, but I will, so stay tuned. Okay. So at this point, we've covered pretty much all of the material. If you have a question, please toss a question mark in chat so that I know to wait while you're typing the rest of the question. But in the meantime, I hope at this point that you sort of have, that your gut reaction to this is like, is that it? Because that is, I think, the right reaction to Monte Carlo tree search. It's a very simple, very intuitive algorithm, and there's really not much to it. It's just sort of make a really good engineering decision at each step about how to solve the obvious problems with the Minimax algorithm, and you get Monte Carlo tree search. I hope you enjoyed the talk. At this point, there's no more technical information, but I am going to do a bit more demonstration of the AI, just because I really like it and I think it's fun and I want you to get to enjoy it with me. So let me switch over to a replay here. This is a a record of a game played by a Monte Carlo tree search algorithm, the one that I just described. It does not have any deep convolutional neural nets or anything like that, so it's just pure Monte Carlo tree search. And I think this one had 60 seconds of thinking time per move. Okay, so this is completely unreasonable for real-time play, but it gives you an idea of what Monte Carlo tree search is capable of if you let it run for a while. So I'm just going to kick it off here. At the top, it will show what is the next pill it's thinking about playing, and at the bottom, it will show the board state plus the location of the pill that it's placed. So it won't have the fancy animation graphics of stuff falling when gravity is applied. So that sort of happens implicitly in between steps here. But it'll show you each of the moves. And yeah, we can just enjoy that. I have a ton of these games recorded because I've been doing sort of experiments with a bunch of different ways of tweaking the rules of the game and stuff like that to see which does the best job. So I've got hundreds of training examples already before I even have my neural net stuff ready to go. But yeah, and if there's nothing more, this is going to be the end of it once we get through this game. So enjoy.